Good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to the Lepanto Institute's Anchor Team. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and with me is the one and only Anthony Stine, who has a great YouTube channel called Return to Tradition. Highly recommend you subscribe to his program. We're going to have a fantastic conversation tonight about all kinds of things that are going on in the church. Really quickly, I want to let you know we've got a major report coming out in a couple of weeks. It's going to be big news. It's going to shake a lot. It's going to cause the bishops a lot of heartburn. And I dare say it's probably going to force them to issue a statement. I hope. In the meantime, why don't we go ahead and open with our prayer? In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Our Lady of Victory, pray for us. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, so this is my good friend Anthony Stine. We have known each other for a couple of years now, at least through social media. A lot of times just through, conversations on Twitter, now X, conversations on, there we go.
Chuckling at memes and things on Facebook,
Yeah.
but nothing. We've only appeared together once before on something. I think that was on Joe McClane's channel.
Yes. And we weren't even on screen at the same time. Yeah. Oh, wait. Yes, we were for the after show.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, we've been acquainted for quite some time, talking about all kinds of things going on in the culture, giving each other tips and just kind of keeping the football going. And I want to start just kind of with a general question about a little bit about your background, but how did you get into doing the podcasting? I've been listening to your stuff for quite some time. I think I started listening to your program in 2019, I want to say.
So what happened is a couple years before I started doing this, I had this itch to start a YouTube channel, but I'd had jobs, I was just busy with life. But even back in the old Gamergate days on YouTube, if you remember those days where you had got young men who were what would have been liberals in the secular realm, upset that the feminist ideology was taking over and everything. They were ranting online about politics and suddenly becoming more traditionally minded. And it took their video games getting corrupted, of all things, to cause that. But I was watching the success these guys were having in the format. I was like, noticing that there wasn't anything like that on YouTube for Catholics. And then after I had moved to Oklahoma from the West Coast for a job at a Catholic university that shut down 8 months later, even though I did my due diligence before taking that job, and it looked like their financials were fine, they shut down because they had fully signed on to the Land O'Lakes statement, and for decade upon decade afterwards, reaped the rewards of that until, and plus bad management, lots of bad management there. But they brought in a dream team of Catholics to try to make it more of a Catholic university again, but it was too little too late. And so after that, I took another job somewhere else. And when that one didn't go too hot because of just things it started to look like there was like things intervening in my life saying that this is not what I needed to be doing. While I was looking for a job, I decided to just start a YouTube channel. Because this kind of stuff isn't really happening in the Catholic side of things on YouTube, except for Michael Matt's operation. I don't know, was Lepanto on YouTube at the time? Back in say 2017, 2018?
Yeah, we had a YouTube channel. It wasn't big. I was mostly doing little video reports on various things, but I didn't have a regular program like this.
Right. It just wasn't much of it out there. And it was 2018 when I started it. It was like late June of 2018. And I remember on August 25th of that year, I was having terrible audio issues. I still was having a hard time working those out. And then Archbishop Vigano released his statement, his infamous testimony.
Oh, yeah.
And I looked around on YouTube, nobody recorded it. So I was like, okay, whatever. I'll just record the thing and put it on up. And the next day, I woke up with my subscriber count doubled and 10,000 views on a video that had the most atrocious audio quality, but nobody had put the thing up. And that was just like the beginning of this, everything snowballing. It's been a sort of a roller coaster ride since then. But I called the channel Return to Tradition because I had at that point taken my burgeoning family out of the sort of ordinary form, typical neighborhood parish, gone FSSP and SSPX friendly full time. And so it was sort of, the name was, hey, let's all, return to tradition together. Right. While I was applying for jobs and things, but there were things going on in the secular culture now where, if you express certain kinds of opinions online, or you look a certain way, you might not be able to get a job. And I was running into that already back in 2018. So 300 job applications later, my channel got monetized. And
so you were originally canceled before you even got started.
Right. Which is why I find it funny. There was, once in a while, some group or another will, take a cheap shot, but like make a video. Anthony Stine is secretly controlled by whoever. I'm like, I must have missed the checks. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm blessed to be able to do what I do. I don't pretend to get everything right, but that's why I try to rely so much on official reporting on things.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And that's one of the things I always appreciated about your program. You give some editorial commentary, but primarily what you do is you give the context, you give some sort of editorial commentary, but then you just read the report. You say, this is what was cited in LifeSite News or, the Washington Times or whatever
I love using America Magazine.
Oh,
I love using the National Catholic Reporter. And I love using Katholisch, which is the German bishops. I mean, I love using, the opposition, essentially, the ultra modernist outlets. I love using them because they will frequently tell you much more than they ever intended to.
Yep. Well, I think what you ought to do is set up an email account and sign up for the AUSCP's newsletter. There are all sorts of gems in those.
Oh, I should. I really should. I'd probably just have, whenever a slow news week hits, they'll send out an email blast.
Oh, yes.
I should do that and do that one with outreach. It's funny. Do you remember when James Martin blocked everybody on Twitter? He had everybody on Twitter blocked. Do you remember those days?
Me.
He didn't. Well, because you were too high profile. But he had me blocked. And then one day, all of a sudden, he unblocked everybody. A few months later, he launches outreach. And the day outreach launches, like a day or so after, I find I'm blocked by outreach.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, well, no, it's not. I have made James Martin's name synonymous with a certain sin that cries out to heaven for vengeance.
Yeah.
Because literally that man spends far too much time thinking about those things.
Exactly. It's obsessive. It's creepily obsessive. As somebody, traditionalist Catholic says, Michael Lofton blocked me on Twitter.
I have him blocked on Twitter, and he blocked me on Twitter too. So it's,
Oh, it's mutual blocking.
Right. I don't have time personally for those who spend all their time at this point defending what's going on in the hierarchy.
Yep.
I don't have time for that. We're well beyond that, like where you can take video footage someone made saying, oh, the Vatican would never do this. It'd be heretical and over the top heretical if they did this. And then like 2 months later, the Vatican goes and does just that thing. And now they're defending it. I don't have time for people like that. I just don't.
No, I completely agree. And full disclosure, Michael Lofton used to actually write for the Lepanto Institute back when he was pretty decent.
He used to work for, he used to write for a lot of other people too. And that actually is why some people behind the scenes were speculating on him being, he's got links to this person and this person. So, you start looking like the meme of the guy with the wild hair and the stringed lines on the whiteboard behind.
Yeah. He used to write for a lot of people, and I've had some conversations with him. He used to be a pretty decent guy, and he actually understood. Yeah, there are serious problems in the hierarchy. There are problems with this whole social justice movement. There are all sorts of issues going on. And he would write some pretty funny, satirical pieces for me that I would publish at Lepanto. And then at one point he said, I've got to go through some personal stuff. I'm going to bow out and I'm not going to do anything for a while. And I was like, okay, fine, no problem. I took him off the back end of the Lepanto Institute website. And it was like 2 or 3 years later, and he popped back up and he had this, what is it? Reason and Theology podcast. I think he calls it Reason and Theology.
And it was a conservative sort of Novus Ordo.
Yeah. And he even had me on his program. We had a great conversation. We talked about the various things that I was working on, and he was applauding my work and saying, yeah, it would be really nice if the bishops would, get with the program and stop promoting things that are against church teaching and all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, I start seeing his name coming out, and it's synonymous with all the Pope-splainer stuff. And I'm going, what the heck happened? What changed?
I have seen people have sort of a crisis of conscience before, where they suddenly go from being awake to what's going on to just, falling for the stop paying attention to what's going on, stick your head in the sand, and submit to Rome no matter what.
Right.
They fall for the Pied Piper's music, basically.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's what got him or what, but I saw him hanging out with what's his name, Mike Lewis, over at Where Peter. I mean,
I try not to cite that website ever, but they do have really well written articles there, and their arguments are really well structured. And once in a while, if you want to give the most charitable take from the other side, you go there,
right?
Because they're not nobody who writes there is a moron.
True. No, that's absolutely true. But they are writing in defense of things that can't be defended. The James Martin sin being one of them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nutty, but so you got your start, you kicked off this YouTube platform. Is this all you do now? Is this your full-time gig?
It is. I write a little bit. I write an article about once a month for Catholic Family News. I would like to expand that to other places if I could, but the problem is when you call Pope Francis Paca Papa and things, it does tend to close some doors for you. It really does. But I don't know. I occupy that space, it seems like, where people will say, oh, he's a sedevacantist. I'm like, not really. I find sedevacantism to be logically implausible.
Yep.
If we were talking for a decade or something, like one papacy, sure, I could see the argument for one papacy. 60-something years is a bit of a stretch for me.
Yeah.
There's not a single, is there even a cardinal alive now who was a cardinal in 1958?
I don't believe so. No.
It's been almost 70 years. I think they've all died.
Yes. So yeah, I agree with you. The sedevacantism position is a non-starter. I tend to take the position that Pope Francis is the Pope. I know that a lot of people don't, and I don't fault them for thinking that way, because it's it's a confusing time, and there are some things that are not clear about his ascension and everything else. I find, I don't know if you've covered this on your program. Have you ever talked about the prophecy that's attributed to St. Francis of Assisi about?
I've cited that numerous times.
Oh, you have?
Yeah. I'm reminded, the thing that makes me think more than likely that he really is Pope and we are just being punished is that prophecy partially, but also that there's that old adage that we get the leadership we deserve. And we are a wicked, sinful generation.
Right.
And while I don't know what the term generation means biblically, because it's been like this since I like to remind people the sexual revolution did not start in the 1960s.
Right.
The first attempt at a sexual revolution in the West was the 1920s.
Yes, exactly.
And it fell apart because of the Depression and World War II.
Yeah. What's interesting about the sexual revolution in the 1920s is that it was all styled on Egyptian style artwork and ways of dressing and things like that. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. I've never really thought about that, but flapper dresses really, and the hairstyles and the things women wore in their hair at the time do kind of have that kind of resemblance to the Egyptian stuff. I mean, it's very pagan.
Oh, absolutely. Completely.
Right. I'm not one who goes and says, oh, secular music, genre X, Y, or Z is pagan, evil, again, whatever. But the way people dress and comport themselves is something I'm much more concerned with. And that's definitely very pagan. But it was stopped because civilization nearly fell apart for a couple of decades, first economically and then the war. People act like the 50s were some high time for the culture. It was degenerate. It just was in the background.
Right.
Behind closed doors. And I wish it was behind closed doors now. That'd be an improvement. That's where things were in the 1990s and early 2000s, comparatively speaking.
There's a book from the 1980s called After the Ball, which was the blueprint that the homosexuals wrote for how they were going to mainstream homosexuality. And it's a very interesting book. I mean, obviously it's it's from their side, so from their perspective. And it was part of this, well, don't lose hope because there is a way forward. We do have a plan in place by which we will be able to make things mainstream. And a lot of it was predicated on this formula of we want this, but not that. And then after a time, say we want that, but not those. And after a time, say we want those. And it's always incrementally moving the benchmark.
I will tell you my own experience with this. I was
Okay.
in student leadership in grad school during the Great Recession. And I was working in student government at a job that was explicitly designed to give me skills to help me get a job, right? I was like doing communications work. I wasn't some elected person. But I remember sitting there, the most moderate person in the room back when I was on paper, probably on the left, but the most moderate conservative person in the room when the Obergefell decision came down. And I had the people in the room I was with all looked at each other and were like celebrating. They're like, great. And now transgenderism is next. It was just like they all got a memo somehow that I, right, that I had never gotten.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I wrote
I was back even in those days, that was a bridge too far for me. I was like, no, this is way too much.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I kept telling my friends back in the 90s when the Patriot Act came out, because everything I look at something, I always look at it, how can the bad guys use this against us?
Mm.
And when the Patriot Act came out and they said, oh, no, this is good because it's going to streamline all of the different intelligence agencies and police agencies, and everybody's going to be linked together, and including the CIA, by the way. And also, it was going to centralize things. This was right about the same time that the FBI had created a program, and I can't remember if it was called Carnosaur or I think it was called Carnosaur or Carnivore, one of those two things. And the whole point of the program was that it was going to sift through every email that goes through the ether and just looking for keywords and looking to follow the strings of those keywords and figuring out, okay, if there's a collection of this keyword in one particular area, we know that there's a problem over here. And that information was being shared with all of the other intelligence agencies. And my friends, who were all very, very conservative, they were all rah about the Patriot Act. And I said, do you realize that this is extremely dangerous in the hands of a Hillary Clinton? Oh, that'll never happen. Oh, come on. Yeah. And now look how FBI raids are being enacted against pro-lifers, against faithful Catholics, and how FBI members are embedding themselves in traditional parishes and trying to collect information. You know, this idea that, well, you know, everything's going to go on as it is and that these agencies aren't going to change is really foolish. It's extremely foolish.
At least people finally woke up when they decided to arm the IRS.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
they're not using that. They're not arming them to send them to the country clubs.
You're right.
You know, they're doing that to, you know, kick down the doors of normal people's houses.
Somebody asked.
Yeah,
go ahead.
it's the I don't know if you heard this, but it came out that the IRS now has access to AI that was in the hands of, I think, the State Department or the Department of Justice, and they're using that to get status updates on every single bank account in the United States at all times.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
And then they give that data to the IRS. The IRS knows how much money you owe them. What they should do is just send you a bill.
Not right.
And then you can say, attach attach your adjustments.
Right. Yeah.
But
yeah.
You know, they like being tyrants.
Well, they also like making sure that you feel like you're the one that has to do all the work and all the digging and owe them something. Oh, please, master, let me hold on to my little pittance. Yeah. I mean, it's sick kind of stuff. But, and it's interesting that the ones that they really oppress are the middle class.
Well, you have to. Every revolutionary group in history, every tyrannical organization and every tyrannical government in history always went after the middle class. They weren't worried about the poor. They always went after the people with enough money and enough leisure to cause problems. Right. And the poor don't have either. Either the poor have nothing but leisure, but they don't have any money. So they're not really a problem unless somebody whips them up. I'm reminded of, it's the old cliche to cite 1984, but it's one of those times where Orwell was very coherent in that book, where he mentions how the secret police in that book, they kept they'd occasionally peer into the proles, to the poor population. to see what was going on there. And if there was a rabble rouser, they'd go and do something about it. But otherwise, they weren't watching them. They were watching the people in the outer party being the bureaucratic class, which is where anybody who was middle class was. Everybody else was essentially poor, even if they had some money because they were like a sports person or something.
Yeah, and that very scenario is exactly what played out in every revolution we've ever seen. They go after the middle class. The wealthy either are part of the problem because they're coordinating things, a la the Duc d'Orléans in the French Revolution, or they are they pick up their funds and they leave.
Well, it's sort of like even in the revolution in the church after Vatican II, you saw the same thing.
Yep.
Who were the old wealthy guard? I mean, it was the handful of holdout bishops, traditionalists, right? I mean, and then it's the other thing that happens after a revolution is after every revolution, everything breaks down into two factions after the revolution. And I can never remember the name of the two post-conciliar factions. One was like Communio, and what was the other one?
Oh yeah.
One, you can basically think of them as the Ratzinger and the
Ratzinger or Hans Kung. Yeah.
Ratzinger on one side, and then Martini on the other.
Right.
Basically. And that's what we are living in now. And people don't like being reminded that Ratzinger was himself on the Holy Office's watch list as a possible modernist before the council, but he was. That's the same way that the future John Paul II's doctoral dissertation was rejected by the I cannot remember the name of that college in Vatican City.
The Angelicum?
Yes, the Angelicum. His doctoral dissertation was rejected because it was modernist. These are historic facts. People don't like them.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't realize that. No, I know
that happened when he was an archbishop, by the way.
Yeah. There were things that John Paul II did during his papacy that I thought were very eyebrow raising, to say the least. On the other hand, he did some things that were also quite good.
Right. This is what I always remind people, that Francis is just the logical end state. Like mask off. And I think that partially because I have heard from numerous sources that even the Jesuit seminaries have a lot of conservative seminarians in them. A lot of them are traditionally minded. If there is such a thing as a hermeneutic of continuity, they want an authentic hermeneutic of continuity, something more like Bishop Schneider. And that concerns everybody in any position in the hierarchy.
You know, there's an interesting approach to looking at the papacy of John Paul II, the papacy of Pope Benedict, as opposed to the papacy of Pope Francis. And I think that the thing that we can look at is, we can say that Pope John Paul II and Benedict XVI were both bitten by the bug of modernism. They both drank from the well of the Nouveau Theologiens. You know, you've got Hans Urs von Balthasar, who was praised by both of them, which I find baffling because von Balthasar was not a good theologian. And then there are others, but these Henri de Lubac is another one they really liked and applauded. But this is part of the Nouveau Theologie. On the other hand, you've got Jorge Bergoglio. These two, with that kind of formation in mind, were men of goodwill. They desired the salvation of souls, and they understood that the purpose of the church was to save souls, and they actually acted as if that's what the church is meant to do.
Right, and they tried to preserve some semblance of Catholicity.
Exactly, but
whereas they now refer to it as the synodal church now, and they openly say the traditional liturgy is not compatible with the theology of the Catholic Church anymore. When they're saying that stuff, that it feeds into my. I will just say this much about the validity of Francis. I will be shocked if one day somebody does not declare him an anti-pope.
I agree.
That will shock me. I don't have the authority to make that declaration. I don't know if I won't hold it against any layman who does make that declaration, but I don't believe I have that authority.
Sure.
But if future Pope Gregory the 17th doesn't one day sweep away much of the post-conciliar era, beginning with this pontificate, I would be shocked. I just hope to be around to see it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think that I also would be very surprised if a future pope did not declare this papacy invalid, or at least turn over everything that this papacy had done.
Can you imagine being a pope elected in like your late 60s, early 70s, and knowing your only thing you're going to do with your entire papacy is release encyclical and motu proprio, and one after the other, dismantling a decade and a half long papacy? That would be terrible.
Well,
Like,
not only that, but just again, looking at John Paul II and Benedict XVI and comparing them with Pope Francis, I think what we find is that we have two popes prior to Francis that were men of goodwill. And then with Francis, it's pretty clear that his whole intention is to destroy the everything that came before 1965.
Mm-hmm. Well, he has said himself that his job is to finish the implementation of Vatican II.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's that his particular faction, the Martini faction, interpretation of Vatican II, which
Right.
leads to decentralization of the decision-making authority in the church on doctrine and dogma, putting it in the hands of essentially laity and their sort of immanentist sort of their individual experience of the faith,
Mm-hmm.
which reduces it to relativism and really weaponizes the permanent aggiornamento in the church.
Right.
And then making it so that any changes that are imposed cannot be undone. This side, at least not on this side of a bunch of mushroom clouds, which I think is not outside the realm of possibility. I tend to take Marian apparition warnings pretty seriously.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah. I know a lot of people discuss and debate what the fire falling from the sky is going to be, whether it's going to be nukes or something that comes from a meteor shower or a comet or something along those lines. But as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't really matter.
yeah, it doesn't matter that much. When that day comes, if that day is coming soon, then you want to be in a state of grace when it happens and have a bunch of supplies on hand in case you make it through whatever that event is. Beyond that, you shouldn't be that concerned about it.
Agreed. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the recent, well, I'm not entirely switching gears because we're talking about some more bizarre things going on in the Vatican. There was a recent meeting that you covered about certain stone cutters that were, I like how you call them stone cutters.
I stole that. Yeah, I stole that from The Simpsons.
Yeah.
I say what you want about The Simpsons, but they do have a great way of taking shots at the untouchable elements of society. At least they used to.
Yeah. So what happened from what I have read, I read a little bit about the statement that came out where Coco Palmario and a few others were saying that there should be a permanent dialogue at the table with the Freemasons, and others were saying that the Freemasons, citing fiducia supplicans, that Freemasons should be permitted to receive Holy Communion, that the excommunications should be lifted. And now I'm hearing that the church should actually apologize to the Freemasons.
Yeah, they want the Pope to apologize on behalf of the whole church for 200 years. What are we, almost 300 years now of popes saying no to Freemasonry?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, over 300 years, because I believe it was
1738.
Yeah, so it's almost 300 years of
Yep.
Literally every pope who had the time to say something negative about Freemasonry. There were 300 something edicts or 600 something things said in various forms by pretty much every pontiff in 300 years saying no to Freemasonry. And if Francis were to do that, that would destroy magisterial authority. Utterly annihilate it. It'd be annihilated. Because how can possibly every single pope for 3 centuries be wrong on such a fundamental issue as whether or not Catholics can join secret societies?
You're right. Now, what's interesting, I did a program just recently with a friend of mine in England, and we were talking about this very issue. So I pulled up in Eminenti. I revealed to you when we were having our conversation in the green room before we started that I did my senior thesis on Freemasonry. And I remember having to read these encyclicals. And this one is very interesting to me. In Eminenti, we therefore, having taken counsel of some of our venerable brothers among the cardinals of the Roman Catholic Church, and also of our own accord, et cetera, do hereby determine and decree that these same societies, companies, assemblies, meetings, congregations, or conventicles of liberi mutuari or francis masons, or whatever other name they may go by, are to be condemned and prohibited, and by our present constitution valid forever. We do condemn and prohibit them. So in eminenti says that this is forever valid.
Mm-hmm.
It then goes on and it lays out exactly what is forbidden. And this I found very, very interesting. Wherefore we command most strictly and in virtue of holy obedience all the faithful of whatever state, grade, condition, order, dignity, or preeminence, whether clerical or lay, secular or regular, even those who are entitled to specific and individual mention, that none, under any pretext, for any reason, shall dare or presume to enter, propagate, or support these aforementioned societies of the liberi mutuari or francis masons, or however else they may be called. Or, and this is where it gets really interesting, or to receive them into their houses or dwellings, or to hide them, be enrolled among them, joined to them, be present with them, give power or permission for them to meet elsewhere, to meet them in any way, to give them in any way advice, encouragement, or support, either openly or in secret, directly or indirectly, on their own or through others. Nor are they to urge others to tell them, incite, or persuade them to be enrolled in such societies, or to be counted among their number, or to be present or assist them in any way. And then it declares that all of the, under the pain of excommunication, for all of the above mentioned people, which is incurred by the very deed without any declaration being required, and from which no one can obtain benefit of absolution other than at the hour of death. What's fascinating about this is that I know for a fact that there are Knights of Columbus troops that march with the Freemasons in various parades. They're patriotic parades, but we are not supposed to be intermingled with them in any way, shape, or form. Not at all.
Like if the Masons are marching in that parade, you can't.
That's right.
So this begs the question. It sounds like an automatic excommunication.
Yep.
Correct. So does that mean Cardinal Coco Palmiero is excommunicated himself?
It sure sounds that way to me.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
What else is interesting in regard to this is that almost 100 years ago, this is Pope Leo XII in 1826, he wrote Quo Gravaria on secret societies.
I think I have that one on my channel too.
Okay. So he cited in eminenti in this encyclical, reiterated what it said. And then he also said, by our present constitution, perpetually valid, we condemn and prohibit them. He goes on to say, we confirm, strengthen, renew that constitution by the text of this present letter in all things, on account of all things, just as it had been published, firstly by our own motion, by our authority, and in our name, we will and decree that it have perpetual force and efficacy. What this means is that he is binding for all time.
Right. And it sounds to me like this reminds me of quo primum in that old debate. People say, well, a pope can't bind a future pope. I'm like, they probably can. But if a future pope could unbind himself if he needed to through a properly formatted decree. But this sounds like the same kind of language where the pontiff is tying the hands of any future pontiff. Not that he should have to, because a pope would actually condemn Freemasonry, and only dialogue that would ever happen between the Catholic Church and Freemasonry would be a call to repentance. Right.
So I think with regard to quo primum, and I think that a lot of people misunderstand what quo primum actually did with its perpetual statement. It wasn't saying that this particular missal will never be changed, will always remain, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we don't use the missal of 1571 or
no, we never have. What that encyclical said was that this missal is always valid. and it is always good, and it may always be used anywhere and by anyone. That's what he was saying. In other words, for the popes to decide at some point that they want to make amendments or change the way the mass is said, that's fine. But what Quo Primum says is that what they have promulgated here, kind of like, giving permission to pray the rosary and saying that this is a good, giving the church's blessing to it. Once the blessing exists and says that this is good, it's good for all time, and it's never not good. And the permission granted in Quo Primum was that anyone could, any priest can say this missal at any time. And that was the general perpetual permission. So then the question is begged, well, does that mean that a pope can't forbid a priest from saying this particular missal? And I think the answer may be yes. And that was actually borne out in a questionnaire that Pope Benedict XVI put out before he issued his motu proprio, allowing the traditional Latin Mass. What he said, or in the questionnaire, what they were looking for was if there is any basis in the idea that the traditional Latin Mass can be abrogated. And the answer was no.
Yeah. Hence why that document always comes up whenever we talk about perpetually binding documents.
Right.
There's a YouTube channel, another traditionalist YouTube channel, has started diving into these perpetually binding statements from the Middle Ages and found that there's a whole lot of them, that they come with anathemas and curses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he just put it up. The channel's Ascent from Mount Carmel. I'll give him a shout out here. He does these short little 5-minute videos about this stuff. And
I love that.
Learn a lot. If you really want to get a black pilling sort of journey, go watch his series on the heresies in the New American Bible. It's a 14-part series.
Wow.
It's depressing when you watch that one, because most of us have one of those somewhere, right?
Right. Well, in the new, I know that the New American Bible has problems, especially translation problems. And I've known that for a long time. When I went to Christendom College, so my professor on scripture, both Old and New Testament, was saying, we're going to use the RSV Bible because the New American Bible is just awful. So
right. And that Catholic university I worked at, there was their very tiny theology department. One of the professors there had written to the USCCB begging them to get rid of the New American Bible. Obviously nothing came from it. There's no chance that they'll ever bring back the Dewey or even a Knox translation. Those are my two go-to translations, just because they're clear. But I know it's interesting, this Freemasonry topic, because they clearly don't care what binding statements came from even previous recent pontificates, because it's the magisterium of Francis.
Right.
Do you remember anyone ever talking about the magisterium of Benedict XVI?
Nope.
Or the magisterium of John Paul II, or the magisterium of Pius XII? That never happened. So why does the reigning pontiff get his own magisterium?
Well, and why are we now being required to hang on every word that he utters, regardless of whether it's in a formal situation or in an informal situation? It's like they treat him as if he's not the vicar of Christ, but an oracle.
Well, we are required to hang off his every word, but we're chastised for doing it if we don't do it the way they like.
Right. You're right. Right.
I am convinced that all the anti-social media stuff that he's been saying in the last couple of months is because people are now hanging off his every word in the way he doesn't like, and then posting it on social media. If you need any proof of that, I'm sure on your Facebook you follow various Catholic news agency type websites, right? Or pages. Go read the comments sometime, anytime he's in the news. Just go read them. It's very entertaining, to say the least. And it's not just in English either. You can go to cath.net, which is sort of I liken it to sort of if LifeSite was a little more moderate, like for Germany, you go read their comments and you'll see the same kind of stuff.
I got to give my friend Anthony Abate a shout out. I'm glad he's watching the program. Anthony, we're going to have you on the show one day. Stand by. I'm going to put you on the spot, bud.
Just don't take any culinary advice from him.
Oh no.
He'll get the joke.
Okay. Yeah. So now we have a situation going back to the Freemason issue. We have a situation where we have individuals in the, not just in the hierarchy of the church, but actually in the curia, who are calling for open dialogue with individuals they're not allowed to have any dialogue with.
Mm-hmm.
And they're calling for open acceptance and all communion with an organization that it is impossible for them to have communion with and remain Catholic. So the sticky widget that's created by this situation alone is very interesting, especially if those who are involved in voting in the next conclave.
And this is why it's one of those reasons I do tell people who I get really tired of seeing people on social media and in the news and in podcasts say Francis's papacy is almost over. I'm like, wait, is it? Are you sure about that?
Mm-hmm.
He could be here for another 5 years. That's not outside the realm of possibility.
Right.
It's not like the man doesn't have access to the finest medicine in the world, the finest medical treatment facilities in the world. And it's not like he isn't well liked by the ruling elites of the world. So
right.
He might be around for a while yet, but the longer he's around, the more men like Coco Palmero are going to be appointed. There will be one see that will technically be open this year that is very high profile, Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Cupich is retiring this year. Now, if I would be surprised if Cupich wasn't still the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago for the next several years.
He kept whirling for like 2 years past his retirement age.
Right. Or if Cupich could be moved to the dicaster, whatever the liturgy dicastery is, because, Arthur Roach speaks English. Cupich does not speak Italian, but he doesn't need to speak Italian to work for Arthur Roach. So,
mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of retirements coming this year, and it will be the longer that they wait, or the longer we have to wait for another conclave, the worse it gets.
Right.
It's just why I also don't take too seriously the fiducia supplicans has made it so it's impossible for the next pope to be like Francis. I'm like, I remember being very optimistic about about the immediate future. I don't share their optimism on that either, but the prospects of a conclave and men who have possibly automatically excommunicated themselves participating in it, when you start going down that road, a lot of these cardinals, I mean, a lot of them have done things that incur automatic excommunication already.
Yeah.
I mean, the James Martin sin, that one does not incur automatic excommunication. Playing fast and loose with a lot of the sacramental things with that,
mm-hmm.
the promotion of heresy. I mean, how many of these cardinals know that when they open their mouth and they say heterodox things that they are preaching heresy? The distinction between formal and material, that might be fine for laymen, but how in the world does a cardinal archbishop who suddenly starts talking about Adam and Eve as if they're metaphors?
Oh, I know.
Or
yeah.
how do you start getting there and give them the benefit of the doubt of them just being a material and not formal heretic, when there is no way that their education did not include the basics of Catholic dogma?
Right.
That gets to be a dark road to go down. That's why I understand where Sedevacantists come from. I don't agree with them on their end conclusion, but I don't hate them. I don't share their animosity towards them that many of them share towards us. Although it is sometimes entertaining to, refer to some people the way they do, the arch layman of this and the, Mr. McCarrick and things.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the issue of sacrilege, I think, actually comes with an excommunication,
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of thing isn't an automatic excommunication. It always comes with, it has to be imposed or it has to be declared after an investigation. I don't think that those things are automatic. There are certain things like abortion, which are automatic excommunications, but even what's that particular crime where they solicitants,
Mm-hmm.
where they solicit you to commit some sort of sin, mortal sin, from the confessional, that also comes with an excommunication. However, I believe that it only happens when it's formal. It can't be done, or it's not automatic in and of itself, mostly because who would know? So there are certain conditions that have to be met in order for the excommunication to be formal. But when it comes to the Freemason issue, it's automatic, and it's an ipso facto excommunication. In fact, any member of the Communist Party is ipso facto excommunication as apostates. So that also is very interesting. But and I'll not that I that actually begs a question about some of the cardinals that are in China at this point.
Well, it begs some questions on what's the limitation of the definition of Communist Party. We've all had our internet tussles with, self-described Catholic socialists,
Oh
people
yeah,
who defend the idea of, well, the Catholic social teaching is really an endorsement of the concept of social democracy. I'm like, not really. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Catholic social teaching, and it clearly doesn't endorse social democracy either. In fact,
right.
the church technically doesn't endorse democracy, strictly speaking. The church doesn't endorse any formal type of government. It does condemn communism, but it doesn't
Mhm.
actually take a side on the fascism versus monarchy versus democracy thing in the modern world. It preferred monarchy, but we are not in the age of monarchs anymore. And so the church
Well,
tries to get along with as many different types of regimes as it can.
right. So the church uh, doesn't just condemn Marxism or
Mhm.
communism. It doesn't just condemn socialism, because it also condemns socialism,
Mhm.
but it condemns them in the same light as all the secret societies, because the church knows and understands. And when I say the church, I mean the church in her history and her richness knows and understands that socialism and communism come directly from the Freemasons,
Mhm.
which is one of the reasons why the Freemasons are fully condemned. Their ideologies were codified by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, but it didn't come from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. They were approached by an organization calling themselves the Council of Nine, also called the Council of the Wise, which was a lodge in London. And Engels wrote about it. He said, we were approached by these people, this lodge in London. And the lodges were Masonic lodges. And they wound up creating the Democratic Workers lodges. So the Freemasons created Democratic Workers lodges, which then popped up all over the place. And then you had the revolutions at the end of 1848 as a direct result of the publication of the manifesto.
Mhm.
But the situation had to be set up first. All of the cards had to be put in place in anticipation of the publication of that document. And then once it was published, boom, all of a sudden revolution starts. Well, it's not like a magic spell. It's not like you had the internet or the radio sitting playing a Pied Piper's song.
Well, right. Plus, you also have to have ringleaders and organizers. It's why back in
Mhm.
the summer of love, when the mostly peaceful protests were happening in the U.S.,
Uh-huh.
it was very clear that the system was not all that interested in finding out who was causing these things. Probably because if they investigated it, they'd find that it was their colleague down the hallway was the one organizing these things with or was their contact within one of the political parties doing it. You have to have ringleaders, you have to have organizers, and you have to have resources. And that's what the lodges have always been very good at doing. It's almost a miracle that the revolutions of 1848 all failed. I don't think any of
Yep.
them, not a single one of them turned into a socialist regime.
No, they didn't, but they didn't fail entirely, because what they wound up doing is toppling the monarchies of various
Mhm.
countries in Europe that were still under monarchy.
Reducing
Toppled those.
either toppling the monarchies entirely or reducing the monarchs to modern style figureheads.
Right. And so the whole purpose of those revolutions was actually just to destroy the monarchy so that they could impose a republic, which
Because the
it
republic's a stepping stone.
right, exactly. Exactly. So they wanted that stepping stone. And that, of course, is what led directly to World War One. And World War
Mhm.
One, of course, was orchestrated by the Black Hand, which is a Masonic outlet, and on and on and on.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the roots of World War One are fascinating too. When you start looking at the economic policies of Germany, and how that was ruffling feathers in the financial sectors of the United Kingdom, it's it's more than the official story of interlinked uh, treaties and the loss of a monarch. At that time.
Yep. 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 Um, So I want to kind of hit on something that you were talking about very recently. I think it was this morning's broadcast. I know that it's very late for you. You get up at 2 in the morning or something crazy like that so that you could put together a broadcast at 3. So I'm going to let you go here in a few minutes, but I do want to talk about this bishop from Argentina that you were talking about.
Yeah, whose name I'm probably saying wrong, but it's Archbishop Emeritus Aguirre.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
he was the Archbishop of La Plata when Cardinal Bergoglio was just Cardinal Bergoglio, and their back and forth was typically that Bergoglio would offer something heterodox, and in his weird populist kind of way, and Aguirre would be the actual Catholic voice in opposition to him among the Argentinian archbishops. And as the story goes, when Bergoglio becomes Francis, Aguirre hits 75 early in his papacy, and he submits his resignation as canon law requires. And like that afternoon, he got a response from the Vatican. Like that afternoon, there was like no delay. It's like Francis knew the day it's like he had the day marked on the calendar and had his his Lavender Mafia henchmen waiting for that resignation letter to hit the email inbox.
Right. Well, as I was listening to, because you were reading this recent letter from him, where he was kind of analyzing certain things, but what I started thinking was this guy had been writing letters since before Bergoglio was a cardinal.
Yes, and he didn't even hit my radar until 4 or 5 months ago.
Okay.
Which is unfortunate. It's I don't even know how that happened, except there's not a lot of good networking between the like South American Catholic media, especially the alternative Catholic media, and North America and Europe. It doesn't exist.
No, it's true, and a lot of it has to do with language barriers. But one of the things that I wonder though is if this guy has been tracking I say this guy colloquially, I mean it respectfully. If this bishop has been tracking what Bergoglio was doing before he really rose to any level of prominence, it makes me wonder what information he might still have and what he might share with the American media. And if there is anybody that might have a connection to him or know how to get in touch with him or speak with him, could possibly ask, I would ask that you do so and see if maybe there's some sort of collaboration we could have to bring some of this information to light. I think there's a lot that the West does not know. In fact, a lot the world does not know about Bergoglio before he became Francis. This information, I think, would be key to understanding what's going on.
He would be the person. If there's been rumored, was it the Kolvac report? There's been rumored that there's a copy of it that exists outside of the Vatican.
Okay.
And he's on my list of people who might have one.
Okay.
But if you're looking for someone from the Western media who could contact him, it would have to be John Henry Weston.
Yeah,
because he's the one publishing those letters. Of course, there might be somebody in the American Episcopate who knows how to contact him. That's logical. I don't know how to do it, but he should write those things down. Start writing down the things he knows.
Yep.
This is why, because the best resource we have right now is a source that's getting harder and harder to get a copy of, and that's, of all people, Austin Ivere's book, The Great Reformer, the first edition of it. Because in the first edition that he goes into much more detail than anybody asked him to about a collaboration with a certain junta in Argentina.
Yeah. It's one of those funny things. They want to fawn all over each other and spill all the beans and talk about how great everything is, and then they realize they've said too much.
Right. And it's harder to get a copy of that book because, not to toot my own horn, I try not to do that. But apparently I found out that if I mention a book that people should read, people go buy it. So I found that out because while I'm not a sedevacantist, I think one of the best books on the origins of the new mass is Father Cicato's Work of Human Hands. And that book, like the first time I mentioned it on my channel in a live stream, apparently the one website you could buy it, I got inundated with requests for it.
Right. Yeah.
And again, that his book was lauded by non-sedevacantist liturgical theologians, people who were experts on the liturgy. They read his book and said, "Yeah, he's not wrong on any of this."
Right.
He also has his YouTube channel is still up, even though he passed away several years ago, and he gives you the short version of each chapter in short video form. So you should go check that out. It's if you're interested in that subject. But the same effect happened with the Great Reformer. Like, you can't find it really. The first edition, you have to go to Thrift Books or Abe Books really to find it. Maybe those are the only places I can think of. Maybe eBay.
Right.
You go to Amazon. Like, you have to find out what the cover looks like of the first edition, and then start looking through the used copies on Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because they reissued a shorter second and third edition later on, with a lot of those details just edited out.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like what happened to what was the name of the guy that wrote Fahrenheit 451?
It wasn't Heinlein. It was
no.
Yeah, was that Heinlein who wrote? No,
it wasn't Heinlein. I can't remember, but whoever wrote it, he Fahrenheit 451 was.
It was Bradbury wrote that.
Bradbury, book. That's it. Ray Bradbury wrote this book on censorship and how the firemen were people with blowtorches torching whole libraries, and he found out years later that they had actually abridged and censored his first book, the first edition.
Well, that book shows up on banned books lists. Actual banned books lists, right along. Like, it's the most recent version of that is that To Kill a Mockingbird shows up on those lists too, because it makes people uncomfortable, which is kind of the whole point of that book.
Yep. Ironic. Now we have a bunch of people saying Bradbury. Thank you. You get these little moments where you forget words and people and all that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, it is late for you. It's been a wonderful conversation. I thank you much for coming on. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. What I would ask everybody here, if you like the content of this program and you want to support the work of the Lepanto Institute, first of all, do sign up for Anthony's program at YouTube. Go to Return to Tradition on YouTube and sign up. Just subscribe to his program, subscribe to everything that he's got there. He's got a great show, about a half hour, 15 minute to a half hour program every day.
A short form news video, a little bit longer form live stream, but I don't even go this long. So
yeah, I do an hour once a week, and that takes it out of me. But every day he's got solid, great content. I have no idea how you keep up with it and how you collate everything.
I haven't had a day off since the announcement of Bishop Strickland being canned.
I hear you.
I
hear you.
Since Benedict XVI passed away, things have been speeding up.
Yeah. Oh, definitely for sure. And so yeah, sign up for his YouTube channel, subscribe, hit like, all that kind of stuff. For our show, please support the Lepanto Institute. $15 a month. It goes a long way. That's how we keep all the investigations that we do going. That's how we conduct these programs and get these great guests, is through your gracious support. So please, for $15 a month, that's just 50 cents a day. The price of a Coke, less than the price of a Coke nowadays, thanks to Bidenomics. Anyway, that's the show. We're going to wrap up with our closing prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Our Lady of Victory, pray for us. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Anthony Stine, thank you so much for joining us. All of you, thank you so much for joining in this evening, and I will see you all next week.